Hello everyone and welcome to my podcast, Book and Story World with author Priya Grewal. I hope everyone is having a fabulous week so far. So for season 5, episode 4 of my podcast, I thought I would read aloud my most recent novel, which is a supernatural horror called Destroying the Coven by myself, Priya Grewal, and it's available on Amazon in paperback or on Kindle. So, I thought I would read the book from start to finish for today's episode. So the book again is called Destroying the Coven. The subtitle on the front cover is When Receiving Magical Powers Turns Deadly, and it's a supernatural horror. Okay, let's get started. Destroying the Coven by myself, Priya Grewal. Chapter 1. Meeting up with Siva. Revan was 18 years old and had been attending the University of Arich for a month now. The University of Arich was in the town of Shebik, a few hours away from Revan's hometown in the south of the country. It was mid-October and the leaves had begun falling from the trees and turning brown. Revan was enjoying walking through the brown leaves littering the ground. Revan was a handsome male with straight red hair and dashing blue eyes. He was studying sociology at the university, his favourite subject from school. He had just finished attending a lecture and was on his way to meet his female friend called Siva. Revan walked through the door of Cafe Campus, the student cafe. It was 3 p.m. on the dot, the time he had arranged to meet with Siva. As he glanced around the crowd, he spotted Siva's long auburn curly hair that she was wearing loose today. Her hazel eyes crinkled up in happiness as she smiled enthusiastically and waved at Revan. Revan smiled at her and went to sit on the seat opposite her. "Hey," Siva greeted Revan. "Hi," Revan greeted back, placing his rucksack on the cafe floor. "How are you?" Revan asked Siva. "Great, thanks. And yourself?" Siva replied. "Good, thanks," Revan responded. "Just came straight from my lecture." "Oh, I already ordered us a couple of cake slices. The waiter will bring them over." "My treat," Siva told Revan. "You sure?" Revan asked, surprised by Siva's kindness. "Yes," Siva replied, laughing. "Thanks," Revan responded gratefully. The waiter brought over 2 slices of chocolate cake. "Yum," Siva exclaimed jollily. "Thanks again, Revan," thanked Siva. "You're the best." Siva beamed as both Revan and Siva thanked the waiter, who then walked away from the table. Revan dug into the fabulous-tasting chocolate cake slice with the silver spoon given with the chocolate cake slice, which was in the centre of a small plate. Revan and Siva caught up with one another as they ate. Siva had added Revan on social media a week or so into term and began speaking to him via online instant messenger. The two had been meeting up roughly once a week ever since. Siva was currently briefly telling Revan about her English degree lectures. When both had finished eating, Siva suddenly exclaimed, "Guess what?" very jollily. "What?" Revan asked, intrigued. "I attended the best society meeting ever," Siva informed Revan. "Oh, which one?" Revan inquired curiously. Revan wasn't sure where Siva's enthusiasm came from. He hadn't attended anything exciting as of yet when it came to societies. He was interested in attending salsa classes at the beginning of term but couldn't find anyone in his corridor to go with him. He had tried to join a film review society, but the runners had made everything sound ultra complicated, so he had given up on attending, unsure when to volunteer himself to watch a film and write a review on it. "It's called Folklore Society," Siva blurted out excitedly. "It's so cool," Siva continued as Revan listened. "What do you do there?" Revan asked, confused by the name of the society. "It's run by Professor Zezka, a creative writing lecturer. Have you heard of her?" Siva asked Revan intently. Revan thought to himself. "Can't recall having heard of her yet," Revan trailed off, answering honestly. "Oh, she's fantastic," Siva exclaimed. "She brings in articles about sightings of things in folklore, like Bigfoot, vampires, and aliens. Then, as a circle, we study the article together and have a discussion about it. It's so awesome. I'm not exaggerating, Siva rambled on. Siva's description of folklore society had piqued Revam's interest. Does sound kind of cool, Revam stated honestly. Come with me, Siva suddenly suggested. Really? Revam asked shyly. It's not too late to join. Of course not. Professor Zeska said we could bring friends along, Siva assured Revam. May as well go for it, Revam thought to himself. Yeah, okay then, Revam responded. Sounds interesting. Great, Siva exclaimed happily. I've got a seminar to attend at 4 p.m, but let's meet up at 7 p.m. outside Cafe Campus, Siva suggested. Great, see you at 7 p.m. outside the cafe, Revam responded. See you at 7, Siva stated, picking up her bag, leaving the table in a rush to get to her seminar. See you, Revam called after her. Revam decided to also leave the cafe and spend some time in his dorm room and have some dinner before meeting Siva at 7 p.m. Revam was excited to see what folklore society was going to be like. Chapter 2. The Coven. Revam arrived outside the cafe a few minutes early. The sky had already darkened for the evening. The cafe was still open and Revam could see a few students sitting around, some reading, others talking, in the cafe which had its lights on. Revam paced outside the cafe as he waited for Siva. He felt excited to attend the Folklore Society meeting. Siva arrived at 7 p.m. on the dot. She had a small crossbody bag diagonally around her torso, which Revam assumed contained her mobile phone and dorm keys. Revam hadn't brought a bag with him. He had placed his mobile and dorm key in his jeans pocket. You ready? Siva asked Revam enthusiastically as she stopped in front of him. Of course, Revam replied, only having seen folklore lectures on a university campus in American movies. The effect and atmosphere of the folklore lectures on TV made Revam extremely enthralled by the thought of attending the Folklore Society meeting this evening. Follow me, Siva instructed. Revam fell into step with Siva. The meeting begins at 7:30 p.m, Siva told Revam. It usually goes on for a couple of hours or more, depending on the discussion. Great, Revam responded, happily. Revam followed Siva as she led him to a part of campus he hadn't seen before. She stopped in front of some black metal stairs which led up to a red door. This is where the English and history professors have their offices, Siva told Revam. The seminar rooms for classes are empty after 6 p.m, so Professor Zeska uses one of the rooms for our meetings, Siva informed Revam. Cool, Revam mumbled, following Siva up the stairs. Siva opened the red door and glanced behind her to beam at Revam. Revam smiled back briefly. Siva led Revam up another staircase once in the building and stopped on the first floor in front of a door with the number 101 on it. Here goes, Siva uttered excitedly, turning the doorknob on the door. Siva opened the door and walked through it. Revam followed. Revam glanced around the room, which had white painted walls. He saw 5 female students and 5 male students sat around the tables. He saw who he assumed was Professor Zeska sat at the head of the table next to a bust of a woman wearing a tiara on her head. Revan frowned as he glanced at the strange bronze statue, never having seen anything like it before. Revan glanced at the clock. It displayed the time as being 7:20 p.m. Revan frowned again, finding it strange that the other members of the society were already congregated patiently around the tables. Welcome, Professor Zeska greeted Revan and Siva, standing up from her chair. My students call me by my first name, Ifres, which I prefer to be called, Professor Zeska told Revam, staring at him. Hi, Ifres, Revam replied awkwardly. Hi, everyone, he added, greeting the rest of the society. The society members murmured a greeting back. Ifres was an attractive woman who looked like she was in her 60s and had yellow hair, tied up in a bun, and had sparkly green eyes. Please, take a seat, Ifres instructed Revam, gesturing to the seat closest to her. Revam took the seat, feeling a little confused by the silent atmosphere of the room. Siva took the closest seat next to Ifres on the opposite side of the room from Revam. Ifres sat back down and grinned widely at Revam, flashing all her teeth. "Welcome to the Coven," Ifres suddenly exclaimed to Revim. "Coven?" Revim responded, extremely confused. "Let me explain," Ifres retorted. Chapter 3: The Goddess Kafim. Revim stared at Ifres, feeling bewildered. "Siva may have brought you here for a different reason," Ifres confessed to Revim. Revim stared at Ifres, wondering what she was about to reveal. "Just watch first," Ifres ordered Revim. "Don't freak out and run away. Just watch." "Okay," Revim murmured, glancing at the statue of the woman next to Ifres for a moment. Revim glanced back to Ifres and watched as she put her hands out in front of herself. His eyes widened as, all of a sudden, Ifres conjured a golden ball of energy in front of herself. Revim gasped, transfixed, remembering the advice to not freak out, and managed to stop himself from running away. He quickly glanced around the room and saw the other members of the society all staring at Ifres. He glanced at Siva, who was smiling at himself. "Is that magic?" Revim finally spluttered. Ifres looked at him warmly. "Yes," she replied, the golden energy ball still between her hands. "Don't be afraid. Magic is wonderful," Ifres explained to himself. "We chose you to come here for a reason." Ifres paused for a moment. "Are you ready to proceed with our conversation?" Ifres asked Revim. Revim stared at the golden ball of magic again and finally uttered, "Yes," as the world turned upside down for himself. Ifres clasped her hands together, getting rid of the golden ball of magic that was between her hands. Revim was too bewildered to even be able to think to himself at the moment and merely stared at Ifres. Ifres took a deep breath and began talking. "This summer I just passed, I went on holiday to Peru. While I was shopping at the markets, I found this statue," Ifres explained, gesturing to the bust in front of herself. Revim stared at the bust again, taking in the female's face, who looked proud and royal with high cheekbones. "The man who owned the market told me it was the bust of an ancient goddess named Kafim, that some of the people of Peru had believed in centuries before," Ifres told Revim, as the rest of the society members listened enraptured by the tale they already knew. "Being wowed by the statue, I purchased it and brought it back home with me," Ifres continued. "One day I decided to try praying to it, and to my great surprise, Kafim answered me," Ifres confided, looking dreamily at the statue. Revim listened in stunned silence. "Kafim started glowing," Ifres continued. "I kneeled in front of the statue in shock, my hands either side of me. Then gold threads of magic came out of Kafim and travelled up my hands and arms, warming me. I gasped, and then the words, 'You now have magic,' were formed by the golden threads coming out of Kafim with the message, 'Use it wisely,'" Ifres informed Revim. Revim continued to stare at Ifres with his jaw hanging open in awe. "I enjoyed having magical powers but felt lonely with my secret. So I asked the bust of Kafim if I could start a secret society, perhaps with students of the university. Only ones who could keep the magic a secret, of course," Ifres explained. "The word yes appeared before me in response to my request. I acquired the statue over the summer holidays and so far have recruited Siva and the 10 you see here around the table to share in the magic of Kafim. The reason I want the magic to stay a secret is so it is not ruined for us in any way by humans, the nature of mankind being as it is. Folklore society is just a cover for our meeting up with one another. I selected the students based on who would never tell anyone about Kafim and the magic and who I would get along well with," Ifres confided in Revim. "You are my 12th choice to share in the magic of Kafim with me, as Kafim told me you would never tell a soul about the magic," Ifres beamed at Revim. "We call ourselves the Receivers. Do you want to become a part of my secret society?" Ifres asked Revim. Revim gasped in awe, glancing at the bust of Kafim again, thinking about the new magical opportunity. Chapter 4: Kafim's Gift of Magic. "Yes," Revim finally uttered. "I do want to become a receiver." "Yes," Ifres cheered. The rest of the society all started clapping. Siva beamed at Revim. Revim felt nervous anticipation engulf him as he waited for instructions on how to receive the gift of magic from the goddess Kafim. Stretch your hands out in front of you, Ifres commanded Revim. Revim did as told, and then Ifres turned the bust of Kafim around to face Revim. Revim stared at the bust as Ifres began chanting silently to herself. Revim could see Ifres's mouth move without hearing her words. Suddenly Revim gasped as the statue of Kafim began glowing a golden glow. Revim glanced at Ifres as her mouth moved furiously fast. As Ifres had described, Revim saw golden threads come out of the statue of Kafim and start crawling towards him. Revim felt a warmth enter him as the golden threads moved up his hands and arms. All of a sudden, Kafim stopped glowing. Ifres stopped chanting and looked at Revim. It is done, Ifres informed Revim. You now have magical powers. Really? Revim shouted out excitedly. Yes, really, Ifres laughed. All you have to do to use it is command the words in your head, Ifres informed Revim. For example, if you want a chocolate milkshake, say chocolate milkshake to yourself in your head and it will appear. Give it a go, Ifres taught Revim. Revim excitedly closed his eyes and said chocolate milkshake to himself in his head. As he opened his eyes, he saw a golden swirl of magic in front of himself, which then transformed into a glass of chocolate milkshake. The glass the cup was in was very luxurious looking and contained a straw to drink through. Wow, this is incredible, Revim exclaimed. Drink it, Ifres suggested. Revim picked up the glass of milkshake, placed the straw in his mouth and sipped. The milkshake tasted glorious. Tastes incredible too, Revim responded honestly. Ifres laughed. Right, last things for you to know. Tell no one about this, of course. Siva will be your guide and help you get used to your powers. Any questions, just ask her. We meet weekly in this room every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. to catch up with one another and talk about our magic. Any other questions? Ifres asked Revim. Siva smiled broadly at Revim. He was glad she had been selected to be his guide. No more questions. You've explained everything. I just want to say thank you to you and the goddess Kafim for giving me the gift of magic and including me in your secret. Revim bowed his head respectfully to honour Ifres and the bust of Kafim. Ifres clapped and laughed again. You're welcome, she cried happily. Next, she clapped her hands again and the room transformed around Revim and the others. The room had been transformed into a lovely-looking room with patterned carpets and walls. Funky-sounding music began playing and a table full of cakes and desserts appeared on a fancy-looking table. Wow, Revim exclaimed in shock again. This is awesome, he shouted out. We don't really sit around a table in a plain room and talk every Wednesday in a circle, Ifres informed Revim happily. We have a party. If anyone tries to open the door, it is always locked, and using magic I've soundproofed the room so no one can hear anything from outside either. I always close the blinds to the windows so no one can see in, Ifres finished telling Revim. This is amazing. Thank you again. Revim didn't know how to express in words how excited he felt about the magic. It was like a whole new world of excitement had opened up to himself. Right, let's dig into the cakes and desserts and I'll introduce you individually to each society member, Ifres suggested to Revim. Revim grabbed a delicious-looking cake and then let Ifres guide him around the room to meet each society member. Chapter 5. Playing with Powers. It was a couple of days after the meeting that had changed Revim's existence. He was over the moon about being bestowed with powers. The day after the society meeting, Siva had helped Revim transform his dorm room into a luxurious abode. If anyone other than Revim or a society member entered his room, the room would switch back to normal. He loved his new ultra-spectacular room, complete with a large TV for him to watch and a fridge full of desserts, drinks and treats. Today, Revim and Siva were in the local shopping mall. Revim had been inspired by remembering the Sabrina the Teenage Witch movie from the 90s, where the cost of the item Sabrina was buying suddenly decreased. Revim had asked Siva whether they could go to the shopping mall and do the same thing. Revim and Siva now had bags of clothes in their hands and were beaming ecstatically. Revim had suggested changing the cost of the item to 1 penny instead with a magical spell on the cashier to get away with it. Revim and Siva had then had fun buying lots of new trendy clothes to wear. The pair were currently sitting on a bench outside the shopping mall centre with their bags and sipping on 2 delicious drinks through straws that Revem had conjured. The pair happily watched pedestrians walk past them. "So," Revem asked Siva, struck with a new thought, "are we good or evil with our powers?" Siva laughed. "I'd say it's open to interpretation. Ifra said we can do whatever we want." Revem giggled, not minding getting up to some mischief. "Watch this," Siva exclaimed to Revem. She tilted her head to point to a man playing his guitar outside of the shopping mall. Passers-by were throwing coins into his hat that he had on the ground here and there. His guitar playing was rather good. Unexpectedly, the man's guitar strings broke. The man looked flabbergasted as he looked down at his broken guitar strings. Siva cackled. "Was that you?" Revem whispered in awe. Siva giggled and whispered back, "Yes." Revem watched as the man began to pack his guitar away, still looking confused about his guitar strings breaking. "That was awesome," Revem complimented Siva. Siva laughed again. "Do you want to go for a stroll around campus this evening and see what mischief we can get up to?" Siva suggested with a mischievous glimmer in her eye. "Really?" Revem responded. "What if we get seen?" "We'll make sure the coast is clear," Siva remarked as if it was obvious. Revem thought for a moment and then said, "I'm game if you are." The pair both smiled ecstatically. Chapter 6. Using Magic to Sabotage. It was the following Wednesday around 6 p.m. and Revem and Siva were lingering in a building around campus again to see what mischief they could get up to before their Magical Wednesday Receivers party began with Ifras and the other society members. Siva had told Revem that one of the male members of the society, called Avas, was bringing a new female member with him to join the Coven. Revem was prepared to act the way he had seen the others do during his initiation the week before, and then wait for the party to begin. Since the Friday before, Revem and Siva had cast magic to cause mischief. They had magicked rubbish out of the bin so the janitor had more to clean up that evening and cackled afterwards. They made the odd person trip over here and there who was lingering around campus in the evenings and had laughed hysterically. They had made the lights go out briefly in the university library and laughed as everyone in the library screamed, magicking the lights back on again a few moments later. Today the pair walked along the corridors outside the lecture rooms and rooms used for social activities in one of the university buildings. This time, as they strolled around wondering what minor havoc they could cause, they bumped into 2 female students, one of which was pinning a poster to a student notice board. The girl who was pinning the poster turned around and smiled widely at Revem and Siva. She had brown eyes and brown hair cut into a bob cut. Another female with blue eyes and medium-length ebony hair looked at the pair too, without smiling. "Hi," the girl with the bob cut greeted the pair cheerfully. "My name is Garsham, and this is my friend Vima," Garsham announced, gesturing to her friend. The girl called Vima nodded her head in greeting and smiled briefly. Revem and Siva greeted the 2 females back and introduced themselves, telling the 2 females their names. "So, what are you up to?" Siva asked the 2 females, glancing at the poster that had been pinned to the notice board. Garsham glanced at the poster, which had a photo of herself on it with the sentence, "Vote Garsham for University Captain of Games and Sports," written in capital letters under her photo. "I'm just putting up posters so people will vote for me in the upcoming elections for the heads of the different societies," Garsham told them all. "This is the last poster I am putting up in here. I've put my other posters up along the walls of the other corridors," Garsham exclaimed cheerfully. "Oh, cool," Revem mumbled. "The vote is taking place next Tuesday in that room over there from 2 p.m. until 5 p.m. There will be ballot boxes out for each society leader vote," Garsham told the pair. "Will you guys come down and vote for me, please?" she asked, eyes widening in hope. Revem and Siva glanced at one another before both responding with a, "Yeah, okay," rather awkwardly. "Great," Garsham responded gratefully. Revem and Siva both smiled at Garsham and Vima. "Well, we better get going," Garsham said, indicating to her friend that they should both leave. "Okay, bye," Revem and Siva said together. "Bye," Garsham and Vima said simultaneously, exiting the building through the exit door on the other side of the corridor. Revem and Siva waited until they heard the door slam shut behind the two females. Siva grinned at Revem. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" Siva asked Revem, smiling from ear to ear. Revem thought to himself for a moment. "You don't mean," Revem began to say, pointing at the poster. "Yes," Siva called out in joy. "Let's rip the posters down using our magic. It's empty in here. No one will see us." "I don't know," Revem responded. "Want me feel a little guilty about it afterwards?" "Of course not," Siva wailed. "She was so in love with herself about whatever she wants to be captain of. She deserves it." Revem thought to himself again for a moment. Siva had managed to persuade him to rip down the posters magically. "Okay," Revem smirked. "You convinced me." The pair both giggled to one another. "Do you want to do it, or shall I?" Siva asked sinisterly. "I'll do it," Revem announced, feeling slightly jealous of the election and captain of something or another role. Revem closed his eyes briefly and thought the words in his head. "Tear down all of Garsham's posters." A split second later, Siva and Revem heard the sound of paper tear and looked at the poster which had been on the notice board, torn to pieces on the floor. Both cackled as Garsham's face was split across several paper pieces. The pair then ran to the other corridors and laughed in glee as they saw the posters all ripped and on the floor. The pair left the university building at 7 p.m. to get to the Coven's meeting on time for the new initiate. They continued laughing about the poster election campaign they had sabotaged, even if they had shut the door to the building behind themselves. Chapter 7. The Killing Begins. Revem began to clap in room 101 with the rest of the Coven members when Rifo, the female initiate Avis had recruited, was given her powers by the bust of the goddess Kafim. Rifo, who had curly auburn hair, had acted extremely excited about the prospect of magic being real. Ifres beamed at Rifo and then transformed the room into the Coven's secret party place. Ifres continued talking to Rifo. Revem had enjoyed watching the same initiation process he had gone through the Wednesday before. When Ifres left Rifo's side, Revem went up to Rifo to introduce himself. Avis, who had brown hair and hazel eyes, had placed himself beside Rifo. "Hey," Revem greeted Rifo cheerfully. "Hello," Rifo responded happily. "Hi, Revem," Avis greeted Revem. "You having fun with your powers?" Avis inquired. "Of course," Revem exclaimed. "I just joined the Coven last Wednesday. I went through the exact same meeting as yourself and came under the cover of this being called the Folklore Society," Revem explained to Rifo. Rifo giggled. "This is incredible. How has your week of having magical powers been?" Rifo asked Revem. "Amazing," Revem replied. Revem had a fantastic evening getting to know Rifo as well as talking and socializing with the other members of the Coven, including Ifres. He had a wonderful evening and night, eating, drinking fabulous drinks and dancing. It was Friday morning and Revem had just finished his 9 a.m. lecture. Revem was walking in a crowd of students towards the student union. As Revem walked, he saw a crowd huddling in front of one of the university dorm room buildings. There was yellow tape cornering off the entrance and pathway to the dorm building. There was also an ambulance and 2 police cars parked in front of the university campus gate. Revem decided to leave the student crowd and find out what was going on. Revem frowned as he got closer to the crowd standing around the yellow tape. He managed to squeeze through to the front of the crowd. A girl with her ebony hair and a ponytail stood next to Revem, transfixed, looking at the scene before her. "What's going on?" Revem asked the female. The girl managed to tear her gaze away from the scene momentarily. "2 students have been killed," the girl whispered to Revem. Then she pointed at 2 body bags on the ground. "Look!" she cried. Revem suddenly noticed the 2 body bags in front of the entrance of the dorm room building. The ground felt like it was collapsing underneath him as he glimpsed the faces of Avis and Rifo in the body bags. The last thing Revem saw was blood on both of their t-shirts before the coroner zipped up both bags to the top, concealing both of their faces forever. Chapter 8. The Shock of the Killings. Ifres had called an emergency meeting the same evening as the bodies had been found. The Coven was all gathered in room 101 and sitting around the tables. Ifres hadn't bothered to transform the room into the usual magical room she conjured up due to the grave news of the killings. The Coven of the Receivers was down from 13 members to 11, not including Ifres, their leader. The Coven members sitting around the table looked shocked and frightened, eyes wide and silent. Siva broke the silence by asking, "Do you think Avis and Rifo's killings are anything to do with the Coven?" Ifres sighed regretfully. "I don't know. It doesn't mean that their killings are related to our Coven," Ifres theorized. "Have you tried checking magically who the killer is?" Siva asked Ifres. "Yes, Kafim doesn't seem to be letting me see who killed them both," Ifres revealed to the rest of the Coven. There were murmurings across the table. "How were they killed?" Revum asked Ifres. "Stabbing. They were both stabbed to death," Ifres told the Coven. The room turned deathly silent and tense again. "What could the motive be, if it's not related to our magic?" Siva asked anxiously. "I don't know," Ifres responded somewhat angrily. "I don't know what all of you get up to all day long. Maybe someone had a grudge against Avis and Rifo for some other reason," Ifres replied defensively. The rest of the Coven members didn't say a word. Revum glanced at Siva before stating, "Does anyone think that someone could have found out about us?" The Coven glanced at one another. "How?" Ifres spluttered. "I soundproofed the room, closed the blinds and locked the door." Siva looked like she was about to say something else until Revum gave her a warning look. He didn't want the Coven to keep badgering Ifres in case they all got blasted to smithereens by Ifres getting defensive about being the one who made the Coven, thinking they were implying the killings were her fault. Revum was haunted by the killings but wanted to put his own safety first. "Do you all think that maybe we shouldn't meet up again until the police have found the killer or killers, for our own safety, just in case?" Revum asked the Coven. Ifres looked at Revum sternly, as if she was contemplating the best course of action for herself. "Shall we vote?" Revum asked the Coven. There were some nods around the table. "All those in favour of not meeting up for a while until the police have caught the killer, say aye," Revum asked all. Every Coven member said aye, apart from Ifres. Everyone turned to stare at Ifres. She looked like she was battling with an inner struggle as she stared at Revum. Finally, she responded with a, "You're right. Let's give the police a chance of catching the killer before meeting up again." She glanced at every member of the Coven across the table before finally stating, "Meeting adjourned." Ifres stood up swiftly and exited room 101. The Coven members all glanced at one another in surprise at Ifres's abrupt departure and eventually began to gather their belongings and leave. Revum exited the room and hovered around the doorway to wait for Siva. When Siva exited the room, she gulped, staring at Revum with wide eyes, and murmured, "What hell have we walked into?" Chapter 9. Lecture cancelled. It was Monday morning, and Revum was standing outside of his lecture room, reading the notice on the door which stated that his 9 a.m. lecture had been cancelled. There were confused murmurs from some of the other students who had just seen the notice too. Revum suddenly heard his phone ring, which was in his jeans pocket. He retrieved his phone from his pocket and answered the call, walking away from the growing crowd of students as he did so. Revum saw that it was Siva calling him. "Hi, Siva," Revum greeted. "Revum," Siva responded, sounding like she was running out of breath. "Has your lecture been cancelled?" "Yes," Revum replied. "Why, has yours?" Revum asked curiously. "Yes, I'm just around the corner from the building your lecture is usually in. Meet me at the bottom of the stairs in front of the entrance of the building in 2 minutes, Siva instructed hurriedly. "Okay," Revum agreed. Siva hung up before Revum had the chance to say anything else. Revum felt confused after the phone call, placing his phone back into his pocket. He made his way to the entrance of the building, hoisting his rucksack along with him on one shoulder. As Revum exited the building and trotted down the concrete stairs, he spotted Siva walking in an erratic manner towards himself. "Siva," Revum greeted Siva, who stopped in an abrupt manner in front of himself. Revum noticed that Siva was deathly pale and looked scared. "What's wrong?" Revum inquired, furrowing his brow in concern. "It's Ifres," Siva wailed. "She was killed last night outside her home, stabbed to death." Again, it felt like the ground underneath Revum had begun to collapse. He stilled, frozen in terror. Chapter 10. The Demise of Ifres. Siva and Revum were sitting in Revum's secret magical dorm room. They were both drinking a can of soft drink to help with their tremors. There's no way this can't be connected to the receivers, Siva theorized to Revim. She sat on the comfortable pink couch in Revim's room. The comfort of the surroundings of the secret magical room helped Revim relax. I can't believe Ifres is dead, Revim wailed. Who would have a grudge against the whole Coven? I don't know, Siva responded, looking frightened. A text message notification sounded on Siva's mobile. Revim glanced at Siva's mobile, which was next to her on the sofa. Siva tentatively picked up her phone and read the text message. It's one of the other members. The rest of the members have agreed to not be seen together as a group in public from now on, Siva explained to Revim, staring at the text message. I think that's the wisest course of action, Revim responded. Siva passed her mobile over to Revim, who read the text message. Revim stared at the words for a moment and then passed the mobile back to Siva. The pair were silent for a moment. When it comes to grudges, Siva began. Sometimes in the horror films the killer is one of the members of the group, a friend, Siva mused. You think it is a Coven member? Revim asked, shocked. Revim pondered this for a moment. It's a possibility, but why? Revim thought out loud. What would the motive be in killing Rifo, Avis and Ifras? I don't know, Siva replied. Killing is usually born out of jealousy. I guess it doesn't make sense for a member to be jealous of the rest of us for some reason. We were all given magical powers from the goddess Caffeine. Not to sound cliché, but I guess this means everyone is a suspect, Revim exclaimed, feeling scared. Siva and Revim stared at each other in silence, feeling lost and frightened. Chapter 11. The Terror Continues. It was Wednesday morning and Revim left his dorm room to attend a lecture. He had received an email the day before stating that lectures would resume as normal from Wednesday after the shocking news of the killing of Professor Zeska. Revim hadn't left his dorm corridor since finding out Professor Zeska was dead on Monday. Siva had left his room that day and stayed in her room too. The pair were wondering if they should even contact one another due to fear that their Coven, the receivers, were being killed off one by one, or even two by two. They both pondered whether it was better to try and disguise and break all association with the Coven so they weren't targets for the killer or killers. Revim glanced around nervously as he walked to the building his lecture was in. He carried his rucksack strapped onto both his shoulders today. As Revim neared his building, he recognized a male Coven member called Uzjol. Uzjol was running towards Revim. Revim stopped in front of the building his lecture was in, and Uzjol came to a sudden halt in front of himself. Uzjol looked terrified. What's wrong? Revim asked, concerned. It's Siva, Uzjol spluttered. She was stabbed to death outside her dorm building last night. Fear flooded Revim's senses. He stood in terrified silence. No, Revim repeated again and again. This can't be, Revim murmured as he went into terrified denial mode. It's true, Uzjol cried. His ebony hair looked windswept and his blue eyes were wide with terror. Someone is killing off the receivers, Uzjol wailed. Revim's senses came back to him, knowing he had to be alert. Where are the rest of the members? Revim questioned Uzjol. I don't know. I just found out about Siva from someone in my dorm building 10 minutes ago and began running across campus to see if I could find a Coven member, Uzjol cried. Revim thought to himself for a moment. I'm leaving, Revim declared to Uzjol a moment later. He had decided that there was nothing to do but leave the campus and the receivers forever. Revim had decided to pack his things and move back to his family home with his parents. Revim turned away from Uzjol and began to rush back to his dorm building. Wait, Uzjol wailed behind him. Don't leave me. Revim turned his head around and called out, I've got myself to think about. Bye. Revim abruptly turned around to continue rushing to his dorm building. Revim was so scared he wanted to leave the university right away. He knew he could only think about himself and his own survival. As Revim hurried to his dorm building, a familiar face suddenly popped up in front of himself. He recognized Garsham's brown eyes and brown bob haircut. He thought momentarily about what himself and Siva had done to Garsham's posters when Siva was alive, Revim thought to himself. Revim, Garsham cried, throwing her arms around him. I just heard about Siva. I'm so sorry. You two look like you were really good friends, Garsham exclaimed empathetically to Revim. Garsham unwrapped her arms from around Revem a moment later and stared at his face, looking concerned. Sorry, I've got to rush off, Revem exclaimed, trembling. I've got to go. Where are you going? Garsham asked sympathetically. I'm leaving campus. I need to get out of here. I have to pack my things, Revem stuttered. Oh no, Garsham exclaimed, eyes widening. Let me help you at least. 2 pairs of hands are faster than 1, Garsham offered. Revem thought about this for a split second and knew Garsham was right. The faster he could get off campus and leave forever, the better. Oh, okay, Revem stammered. Thank you, let's go. Garsham fell into step with Revem as they made their way back to his dorm building. Chapter 12. Fleeing Campus. Revem opened his dorm room door with his key and quickly stepped into his room. It had transformed back into an ordinary room as Garsham was with him. Revem quickly opened his closet door, grabbed a suitcase, placed it on his bed, opening it, and began to grab clothes and throw them into the suitcase. Thanks for this, Revem exclaimed to Garsham appreciatively. Oh, no problem, Garsham replied sweetly, grabbing a t-shirt from Revem's closet and folding it in her hands before passing it to him. Revem noticed Garsham still had her shoulder bag on her shoulder. Revem went to his closet again and picked up a couple of t-shirts. He turned around to put the clothes in the suitcase. As he glanced up again, he noticed that Garsham's hand was in her handbag, and then saw her pull a gleaming large kitchen knife out of it. Revem gasped in fright and quickly ordered his magic to freeze Garsham, shouting the command in his head. Garsham roared as she was frozen in place, attempting to lunge at Revem with the knife. Her face had contorted into an angry snarl, and she was almost unrecognizable. Revem stared at Garsham, shocked as he realized that she was the killer who had killed Avis, Rifo, Ifres, and Siva. She had killed 4 people and just tried to kill him too. Revem fought to overcome his fright and then questioned Garsham. Why would you do this? You've killed 4 people, Revem inquired in terror. Garsham continued to stare at Revem furiously, spluttering. The dorm room door was closed behind Garsham. I'm not unfreezing you until you tell me why, Revem blackmailed Garsham. Garsham stared at Revem with pure hatred and finally spoke. I saw you and your club, Garsham confessed. Revem gasped. How? Revem asked Garsham, shocked. I was suspicious that evening I met you and your friend Siva when I was putting my posters up. The way you glanced at my poster wasn't very nice. So, when I exited the building with my friend, I told her to go ahead of me. Then I opened the exit door again a fraction and saw you 2 speaking, and then I looked in horror as I saw my posters tear and fall to the floor. I didn't know what it was that I was looking at. Witchcraft, I thought to myself. Were the pair of you evil? So I hid a distance away from the building, waited for you and Siva to leave the building, and followed you from a distance. When you went up the stairs into the seminar building, I went up the next flight of stairs outside. Fortunately for me, the bottom blind was a little broken, so I could see what yourselves and Professor Zeska was up to. I saw you all sitting around the table. I saw the bust of the woman start glowing, saw gold threads travel up Rifo's arms, and then saw her play with her new magical powers and conjure a drink in front of herself. Then I saw you all play with your magic when Professor Zeska transformed the room into your little party room, Garsham continued to confess. Revem gasped. He could not believe that they had been seen. Ifres had acted like she was so careful, soundproofing the room and closing the blinds. As Revem stared at Garsham in shock and terror, Garsham continued. So, after that, I merely stalked your little magical group around campus and struck when each one left their dorm building at night time mainly. Avis was so oblivious I managed to get him and Rifo at the same time. Barely any time to enjoy her new powers, Garsham cackled. I followed Professor Zeska home one evening and found out where she lived and killed her when she left her house. Finally, I found the perfect moment to kill Siva, and now I'm here with you. You are meant to die now. Revem gasped again. Garsham, I'm so sorry about the posters. It was petty. Myself and Siva were being petty and jealous and being immature with our powers. But why kill over it? Don't you think you're going a little overboard? Revem tried to reason with Garsham, stunned by her confession. Overboard? Garsham spat. Not overboard enough. I lost the captain of games and sports selection. I found out yesterday evening. Probably because you and Siva sabotaged my campaign by tearing down my posters with your filthy powers, so I wasn't as well recognized. However, that wasn't my main issue with you all. Gershom paused for a moment. I don't care if I didn't win the election, Gershom confessed. When I saw what you used your powers for, sabotaging me, and I saw more of you in the seminar room with powers, I thought, what would you all do next? I'd already witnessed a scene of your magic being used for a bad deed and thought, what next? Killing with your magic? Torturing people? Causing great harm? So I took it upon myself to eradicate and put a stop to evil on this planet before it could fester and grow. And now I'm here, Gershom roared again. Just let me do it, Gershom screeched. Let me kill you before you do worse with your magical powers. That doesn't mean you kill us all just because we tampered with your posters. We wouldn't have done anything worse than that. It was only me and Siva anyway, not the rest, Revan screeched back. Keep telling yourself that, Gershom chided. I killed the rest because they posed the same threat to the people of the planet that you and Siva did. I don't believe you would have not done more and more bad deeds with your magic and then built up to killing everyone on the planet one day, perhaps. Revan shook his head in disgust, an idea suddenly coming to him. How come the goddess Kafim, the female bust who we worshipped, didn't show us who the killer was? Revan asked curiously, wondering if Gershom knew why. Gershom looked genuinely confused for a moment before her face twisted into a smirk again. Maybe she abandoned you all for not worshipping her enough and getting distracted with sabotaging instead, Gershom cackled again. Revan shook his head in disbelief, muttering a whatever out loud. Revan decided to form the words in his mind. Do whatever Gershom was planning to do to me to herself instead, Revan commanded his magic. Gershom gasped as the knife flew out of her hand. The knife spun in the air to face Gershom and began stabbing Gershom's body repeatedly. No! Gershom roared distraughtly as blood poured from her wounds as the knife struck her again and again. She cried out in pain. Finally, Gershom's eyes widened once more in terror. She released a single breath and then collapsed on the floor of the dorm room, dead. Revan stared at the body for a second, ensuring it was dead, and then collapsed onto the floor, thanking whatever powers were out there that he was alive. Revan breathed a sigh of relief, starting to feel positive about the killer of the receiver's coven being dead. Himself and the remaining members were safe again. Chapter 13. Home again and powerless. It had been a month since the morning that Gershom had tried to kill Revan and got killed herself instead. Revan was now relaxing at home, sitting on his living room sofa while his mum potted around the kitchen and his dad was at work. Revan was trying to put the terror of the incident and killings behind him. Revan had called the police after collapsing onto the floor in fear and relief that day. He had told them that Gershom was the killer who had killed the four and she had tried to kill him. Revan told the police that he had glimpsed Gershom getting the knife out of the bag, tackled her onto the ground and grabbed the knife out of her hand and stabbed her in self-defense instead. Revan made no mention of anything magical. The police were happy that the killer was caught and dead, and so was the university staff and students on campus. The police didn't dig any further for a motive and called Gershom unbalanced instead. Revan had decided to stick to his decision about leaving the university for good. The killer may have been defeated, but that didn't mean more issues could arise related to the receivers and their secret magic again in the future. Revan never wanted to be in the path of a killer again. Revan had also changed his mobile number so none of the remaining Coven members could try and contact him and lure him back towards themselves again. He didn't know if they were still meeting in secret together. When it came to the goddess Kafim, Revan had wondered if Gershom had been right. Had they all angered the goddess Kafim by not worshipping her enough after she bestowed them all with magical powers? Revan had even wondered if Kafim had deliberately broken the bottom blind with her magic so that Gershom could look in and see the Coven and their magic and go on a killing spree. Revan wondered if this is why Kafim never showed Ifris who the killer was. She wanted to watch the Coven members be killed for not worshipping her enough. She wanted to watch the killing spree. Revan sighed to himself again, trying to push the matter from his mind. When it came to his magical powers, they had disappeared around 2 weeks after the attack, as Revan hadn't tried to pray to or worship the goddess Kafim with or without the statue of itself. It seemed that she had rescinded his magical powers as a result of his non-worship. Revan didn't care about not having powers anymore. He just wanted to live his life feeling safe at all times. He was grateful to be alive and wanted it to stay that way. Revem never approached a Coven or group meeting ever again. When it came to the fact that Garsham had gone on her killing spree after himself and Siva had torn her posters from the corridor, he could not help but feel guilt about the four who had died as a consequence of his actions. It was something he would have to live with for the rest of his days, whilst being grateful to be alive. The end. Okay, so that was my supernatural horror book, my most recent one, called Destroying the Coven. I hope anyone who tunes into this episode enjoys the story, and thank you to anyone who has ever tuned into my podcast as well. So, as I mentioned, Destroying the Coven by myself, Priya Grewal, is available on Amazon in paperback or on Kindle. So, I hope everyone has a fabulous week. When it comes to the story, I don't know how people feel about it, whether they think Garsham took it too far, or was she justified in her worries about the bad deed of tearing down her posters, and wondering if that would lead to more evil magic used, like killing or torturing instead. So that's one to think about. Okay, everyone, have a fabulous week. Until next Wednesday, where I'll return with my next episode. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.